Welcome to the Soul Seeker podcast. I'm your host, Sam Kabert. I started this pod back in 2019 when I was taking my first steps on the path of remembering. And at the time, the tagline for the show was a journey of self-discovery. A year later, it became a journey of remembering. Yet what I know now is back then I was still seeking. And what I've come to know now is that it's the journey of seeking that brings us the silent, slow stillness of acceptance. And therein lies our own innate wisdom. It's my mission now to eradicate the glorification of hustle culture, as it was my drive in entrepreneurship that led to a greater whole, and that's because I was outsourcing my sovereignty rather than looking within. So let this be your invitation to take a deep breath in and remember that at any time we can shift our thoughts and our feelings to create the outer world in which we wish to live. Soul Seekers, it's time to grow. Let's go. What up, and welcome back to another episode of the Soul Seeker podcast. I'm your host, as always, Sam Kabert, and today I'm sitting down with my new friend, Adam Coelho. Kind of a hard last name to say, especially when you see how it's spelled, but I think I got that down. Adam, for you, for me, for all of you out there in listening land, we'll get started with 3 simple breaths, as we always do. So I invite you guys right now to take a seat. I know a lot of people, myself included, when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm just moving around. So if you're driving or something like that, don't close your eyes. You can breathe with us. But if you are in a position to slow down and take a seat, please do so. So Adam, for you, for myself, and for those of you that can, I invite you to close down your eyes now, finding that comfortable seat, sitting straight up. Just finding a natural exhale, pausing at the bottom of that exhale. And slowly through the nose, inhaling all the way up. At the top of the breath, sipping in a bit more air. And a big audible sigh, letting it go. Another like that. Slow, deep inhale through the nose, allowing the belly and the back body to expand. And when you get to the top of the breath, through the nose, sipping in a bit more air. And audible sigh, letting it go. Last one, slow inhale all the way up. Top of the breath, through the nose, sipping in a bit more. And audible sigh. Letting the breath return to its natural state and rhythm, flickering the eyes back open. Here we are. Adam, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. In a word, how are you feeling in this moment?
Better.
Thank
you for that. Yeah, thank you for that. That felt great. It just made me think how I can't wait to go back and listen to the podcast that we did on my show, the Mindful Fire podcast, a few weeks ago, because we went deep on breath work, and I know that's your specialty. So I need to build that into my habits this year, because that felt great.
Oh, that's awesome. I love to hear that. And yeah, that just goes back to the 90-second rule. And just for everyone listening, as a reminder, the 90-second rule teaches that we can transform our state in less than 90 seconds. And all it takes is a few simple breaths like that. You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because at the time of the recording, it's January 7th, 2026. And like a lot of people, we look at the new year with goals, right? And I'm someone who's constantly updating my goals. I don't really buy into like the new year, new me thing, right? Because I think we're always evolving. Yet at the same time, it is a time of like, okay, the holidays are done. It is a new year. What do I want to shift and change? And through a little bit of breath work, and I guess a little bit of meditation, just reflection, I came up with this idea of Embody 66. You're probably familiar with 75 Hard, right?
I am.
Now, what I'm curious, before I get into this new thing that I'm doing and share that with you and the listeners, what's your take on 75 Hard?
It sounds very hard, and I have not done it. I have had a similar thought to you. I don't know what your approach is, but I had this idea of like 75 aware, right? So just the habits that support me. So like morning routine, journaling, mindfulness, meditation, affirmations. That said, I had not done any days of that. So that's just an idea at this point. But I like the idea of committing to doing, things that support your health and well-being. I just have not had a lot of success sticking to those.
Yeah. We'll get back to my concept of Embody 66. I'd love to hear a little bit more about yourself, so the listeners can relate to you, get to know you, and we can have this discussion. But before I ask you about that, 75 Hard, for anyone listening that's like, what is 75 Hard or anything like that? It's an online challenge that came out around the time of the pandemic. I feel like it got popular, right? Don't
I
you
think so. Yeah, that's the first time I heard of it.
Yeah, I think it was still it was like a thing before that, but I think a lot of it really went viral. At least from my awareness, it seemed like it went viral because people needed something to cling on to. They needed some hope. And 75 Hard is committing to these certain habits and routines daily for 75 days. And there is meditation, there is journaling, there is following a diet, taking a picture, like a progress report, but the drinking a certain amount of water. I mean, I haven't done 75 Hard. This is just from my memory. The two things that really stood out to me were 2 workouts a day, and one of them being outdoors. And especially now it being winter, I know you're in New York, I'm in California, but we just had 2 weeks of rain. I'm like, man, how are people doing that challenge? But my whole take of 75 Hard, for me, I was going through that spiritual awakening period in 2020, and I was going from doing to being. I had written a book called The Written Goal. I'd achieve all my goals, but I was trying to be more. That's it, and not do more. I felt like I had good discipline, so I always kind of looked at 75 Hard as being like, okay, it's probably really good for people that struggle with discipline or accountability because they can get there, but I think that actually is going to lead those people to the same situation that I was, being like, okay, now I'm disconnected from my inner world. Even though there's the journaling and the mindful stuff, it's still like, you got to do these things and check it off. And that was the one thing I noticed in spiritual communities or even mindful communities. Like when we build these new habits and behaviors, even though these habits and behaviors to be more mindful are about being, we approach it like a to-do list and we check it off, and we're not actually present in the moment. So that's kind of my thoughts of it. But with that said, would love to hear your journey, because I know some of that's going to resonate with you as well.
Yeah, it's thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, my journey is evolving. And this start to the year, I feel like I get towards the end of the year, the beginning of a new year, and I'm like, everything's on the chopping block, and I keep most of it, for better or for worse, but I always really feel this need to reevaluate at the end of the year. And, I don't necessarily believe in New Year's resolutions because I failed them enough times to know that that's not a great approach, but I do take stock of where I'm spending my time and my energy and thinking, how do I want to do that? How do I want to allocate those things going forward, and where do I want to put my greatest energy and attention? And so for me, like 2025 was a big year of, I guess, let me step back and say a little bit about my journey. So I've always been entrepreneurial, and it's always been my vision to be an entrepreneur. And that led me to starting, a startup in college, and then having the opportunity to go and work at Google, which is obviously not a startup, but was a great opportunity and led me to a whole bunch of awesome opportunities and meeting awesome friends, which is how we were connected through Jason. And just through that process, I came across mindfulness and meditation, which are not the same thing, but are related. And a friend of mine introduced me to the practice of meditation about 12 years ago. And I gave it a shot because I had all this time. I was riding a shuttle from Mountain View to San Francisco every day. And I decided, okay, I have, this time, I might as well use it. And I started meditating and very quickly realized I'm terrible at meditation. My mind was all over the place. I couldn't focus on the breath even for a couple of seconds. And I gave up, like many people do, because I thought I was doing it wrong. And luckily, I ran into this friend again a couple months later, and he said, "Hey, dude, that's totally normal. Give it another shot." And around that same time, I went to a retreat of sorts, which, to be honest, was more of a Groupon that I bought my wife for Valentine's Day. But we went up to this place called Ratnaling in Sonoma, Tibetan Buddhist retreat center. Absolutely beautiful, wonderful place, and learned more about the practice and fell in love with it. And really, from that point on, had the knowledge and skills to just make a simple practice. And we were talking before about me not sticking to 75 hard and things like that. I used to have this story that I couldn't stick to anything. And meditation was the first thing that changed that story and allowed me to actually stick to something. And it was because I just enjoyed the time by myself. I just enjoyed the peace of that 10 minutes or whatever it was. And that was really powerful because it showed me that, oh, wait, I can stick to things. And I started kind of stacking habits on top of that. And from there, really went deep on meditation, started practicing, did some retreats, became a facilitator of this program at Google called Search Inside Yourself, which is emotional intelligence and leadership through mindfulness. Was an incredible program. I went through it as a participant, got a lot of value out of it, came back and had the opportunity to train as a facilitator, and ultimately trained 1,000 people in that program, started creating my own workshops. All told, trained about 4,000 people at Google on these concepts of emotional intelligence, mindfulness, envisioning, resilience. And around the same time, I became interested in financial independence, retire early. And basically, a friend of mine went off and learned all about, finance and investing. And he and I started on the same day at Google. His name's David Moltz. And he and I he came back and taught me all about this concept of, hey, like once you have 25 times your annual expenses, you can make work optional. Like work becomes optional and you can choose to work or choose not to work. And I was very attracted to that idea of work being optional. And I just kind of, I was incubating these ideas, and they came together around 2020 into what is now my podcast and a huge focus for me, which is Mindful Fire. And you can, if you're watching on YouTube or wherever, you can see I'm wearing this Mindful Fire hat. But really, this is the podcast. It's the laboratory for me to figure out what I wanted to do after I quote unquote retired early from Google. And it's essentially mindfulness, financial independence, resilience, and envisioning. And I feel like that approach is really, it has everything you need to create and live a life that you want on your terms. And so that's what I've been up to. I kind of continued my career at Google. I continued creating workshops around envisioning the life that you want. I had some experiences where I envisioned myself into a bad situation and envisioned myself out of those bad situations, and just fell in love with this practice and this power to the fact that our brains are predicting machines, and we are essentially creating our own reality by the stories and thoughts that we are thinking and paying attention to. And I brought that to hundreds of Googlers, and have subsequently left Google and quote unquote retired early about a year and change ago, and have been working with individuals, teams, and companies to help connect them with themselves, each other, and their biggest vision for their life. And so that's a lot, but that's what I've been up to. And as I said, the new year brings a lot of questions of what was I focused on in this first year of business and full-time outside of Google? And what do I want to focus on going forward? Because I have these kind of two sides of the business. And I was very focused on one side, which was the corporate workshop side, because, and we can get into this, but essentially I was prioritizing money. I was using money as the main thing that I was optimizing for. And that caused me to make some decisions that were in line with that. And now I don't think they were the best decisions necessarily. So we can get into that or not, but that's a little bit about me.
I love it. I love it. So much there. I was taking a lot of notes, and it's really insightful to see money as the driver being the thing that's holding us back. And it's interesting. I would love to unpack that a little bit more. I do have a few things I would just want to comment on as you were sharing. First of all, I didn't realize that mindful fire is an acronym for financial independence, resilience, and what was it? Emotional intelligence. Envisioning.
Yeah. And well, to me it is. I'm trying to make it a thing, right? But it's really financial independence, retire early. But
Okay.
That's what the movement is. But there's a lot of different ways that people interpret it. There's another one that I like, which is financial independence, reprioritize early. But for me, I've really, I was doing the podcast for, I don't know, 4.5, 5 years before I realized, wait a second, these are all the pieces that I think are essential to create a life you love. And so that's kind of where how I'm approaching it now. That's
It's
the
beautiful.
tools.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I love when we see the breadcrumb trail, like in your share, you have the breadcrumb trail of being in Mountain View, or the shuttle to Mountain View, and having the time for mindfulness and how that led to this and that. And same thing with Mindful Fire, being like, okay, I came up with this idea, and then over time reflecting on being like, oh, wow, this is in such alignment. And there's this thing right in front of me I didn't realize. The other side of Mindful Fire that I like, and I just wanted to ask you about, is was it intentional that you're having like the archetypal energies of yin and yang, like the outer world and the inner world, the being and the doing, with the mindful and the fire?
I would say no, that wasn't intentional, because I'm not as well versed in that as you are. So I think it was more of a coincidence.
Yeah, no, I love that, because my first message after getting out of my career and whatever else and getting into mindfulness was soul life balance, a reframe of work life balance. And to me, that's all about the archetypal energies of being and doing. And to me, when I hear mindfulness, I think being, and when I think of fire, I think of action as doing. So that really resonates strongly with me. In terms of envisioning, that's really fascinating. You mentioned a lot of things about envisioning. Could you unpack that a little bit more?
Absolutely, yeah. And envisioning is essentially taking advantage of how your brain works to choose a new story to create a new reality for yourself. And so it's based on the neuroscience of envisioning. And there's a lot of different ways that people talk about this concept, right? There's manifestation, there's the law of attraction, there's prayer. I would put prayer in that category. Some people might not agree with that, but essentially what we're doing is we are orienting our mind towards what we want, rather than letting it just run wild. And so when I teach this, and because I taught this at Google, where I'm teaching this to engineers who are not really into the raise your vibe type of manifestation stuff, I focus on the neuroscience. And really there's two things that I teach, which is first, that what we pay attention to and how we pay attention to it changes the structure and function of our brain. And so this is the idea of neuroplasticity. Everything we think, do, and pay attention to changes the neural circuitry of our brain. And the things that we pay attention to most become well-worn paths in our brain, in our neural circuitry. And so if you think about any skill you've ever learned, like playing the guitar, for instance, at first it's super uncomfortable, and the sounds are foreign, holding the guitar, moving your fingers, all very, very difficult. But as you practice more and more, each of those things becomes easier. And that's because the neural circuitry associated with the motor, cognitive, and auditory skills are becoming stronger and more tightly connected through the synapses. The second thing is that our brains are prediction machines. There's research by a woman named Dr. Regina Pali at UC Riverside, and she did research and published it in an article called The Predicting Brain. And she says that even before events happen, our brain is even before events happen, our brain predicts what's most likely to happen and then sets in motion the thoughts, perceptions, emotions, and even physiological responses for what's expected. She goes on to say, in a sense, we learn from the past what to predict for the future, and then we live the future we expect. And so the way I think about this is we're telling ourselves stories about how our life is going to be, and then we're acting out those stories. And we can choose a new story to create a new reality. And that's what envisioning is all about. It starts with asking yourself, what do I actually want? And not with the normal constraints, right? Normally we have all these ideas of what's realistic and rational and possible. And we have the constraints of our current life, where we live, how much we make, our family situation. But when I teach envisioning and through my Ask What's Possible workshop or through my group coaching program, the Fire Starter program, what I do is I get people to take all those constraints, put them in a little box, set them to the side, and to think really, really big about what they want, what they actually want if they could do anything. And so there's this simple envisioning practice, which people can actually download for free. It's a simple, about 10-minute journaling exercise, which asks you, if everything in my life goes better than I could even imagine, what does my life look like? And importantly, how do I feel? Right? So you can do that, or you can download that at mindfulfire.org/soul. And so we'll make that simple, mindfulfire.org/soul. People can go there, download that, and spend some time. And you can apply this to your life overall. That's where I would start. But I just did this yesterday. As I said, I'm back to the drawing board and thinking, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go from here? And but I did this for my relationship with my wife, with my kids, my health, with each of my kids, and with my business. And so you can really kind of apply this lens to every aspect of your life and get really, really clear on what you want. And from there are some practices, but I'll stop before we get into that. But there are some practices that you can do to actually start, as I call it, planting the seeds, right? So this metaphor I find really helpful is that our thoughts and our stories are like seeds. The ones that we pay attention to most are the ones that we're planting and we're watering. And not surprisingly, those are the ones that grow and ultimately become our reality, because we are orienting our mind to be ready to see those opportunities. It's kind of like when you get a new car, right? Like I got a Subaru Forester in 2016, still going, knock on wood. And suddenly I saw Subaru Foresters everywhere, right? Maybe it's because I was in San Francisco, but all of a sudden, all I saw was those. And it's because it was top of mind for me, and I was ready to spot those Subarus. And the same thing can be said for your vision. Just entertaining your vision through that exercise, just thinking big about what you want, already plants that first seed. And there are practices that you can do to really reinforce and water that seed. And before you know it, it shows up in your experience.
I love it. That's a lot of things I'm about. So thank you for sharing your approach, your practice. I would love to hear some success stories, either yourself or the people you've worked with. Like, what are some of the results that you've seen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's funny because I just got an email from my first ever coaching client this morning, right? I talked to him maybe in August just to catch up. But he emailed me this morning and was like, hey, like, just wanted to let you know that, this stuff works, right? Like he came to
Thanks.
me.
I didn't know. I was hoping it would.
And he's like,
Yeah.
dude, I owe you one. I'm like, you don't owe me anything, dude. Yeah. You did it, right? Like I just helped you see what you wanted and practice these things, but you did it by getting clear on what you wanted. And, he came to me and he was coming out of the military and he's a medical doctor. He was about to go to residency, right? And his life had been taken over by being a medical doctor in the military. Pretty busy job. And he really wanted to reclaim his life and kind of let go of the workaholism and be there for his family. And so what we did was we just got really clear on what he wanted, right? What did he want this to look like in residency and beyond? And some of the things that he wanted to have balance, I don't, he probably wanted to say work-life balance, right? Maybe he wanted soul life balance, but he really wanted to have that when he was at work, he was at work. And when he was at home, he was at home. And he wanted to be the top resident at the end of the program, like, because we're thinking big, right? And he wanted to be brought on to stay at the hospital where he was working afterwards. And he wanted to do, he envisioned doing international trips to, underserved communities and countries where he could bring his expertise and help people on the ground there. And all of these things, in one way or another, has already come to pass. And he emailed me today saying, hey, I'm applying for this fellowship thing to kind of continue my training and go further. And this imposter syndrome started creeping in. And then I remembered the work that we did and the stories that I was telling myself. And one thing that I tell people and tell myself is, when you're caught up in a negative story and you're planting negative seeds, pause and ask, is this useful? Is this getting me where I want to go, or is it just making me feel terrible? And if it's the latter, you can just let it go. And so he did this practice and he realized, wait, no, it's not true. And then he started, saying goodbye to some people that he wasn't going to see for a while, and they were all hugging him, right? The nurses and people that he worked with in the hospital were coming up to him and hugging him, and his boss was like, I've been here 10 years and no one's ever given me a hug, right? And so that reinforced one of the things that we really worked on, was him seeing the good that he's putting out there, him receiving the gratitude from his patients. And he had this crazy situation. I remember he had this situation early on, before he even finished our work. He had this, he was going to move across the country, and he was getting ready to drive all of his stuff across the country from New Mexico to the East Coast. And he had it was going to be a huge thing. And I was like, dude, don't do that. Like, hire movers. Like, that sounds crazy to do. And he told me that someone he worked with in the military, he was having a conversation with him and just holding space for this person. And they said, hey, when are you moving, whatever? And he's talking about, oh, it's going to be $15,000 to move all this stuff and all this. And he's like, oh, did you know about this program? The military will pay to move it for you. And he's like, oh, here, go to this link, fill out this form, and boom, paid $15,000. The military paid it because he was eligible for that benefit, and he didn't have to drive anywhere. He didn't have to, recruit family members to drive across the country. He was just got it taken care of. So, and it's all these little examples again and again. It's so powerful. And the thing I always say is, you don't know when or how it's going to happen. That's the difference between expectations and envisioning. Expectations are very rigid. They have to happen in a certain time. They have to look a certain way, or you might feel terrible, right? And that's the perfect example with New Year's resolutions, right? I used to be like, I'm going to work out 5 days a week. It's like, how many days do you currently work out? Well, 0. But, so it's like my expectation and my reality don't match. And so envisioning is different. It's, here's what I would love. Here's what would be really awesome if it happened. And I'm releasing how and when that's going to happen. I'm just going to trust, and I'm going to plant the seeds through the practices to move towards it little by little. But I'm not going to force it, and I'm not going to expect it to happen in a certain time. And I think that's really important. I think some people, that's where they miss, especially in the manifestation crowd, where they're like, I'm going to raise my vibe and I'm going to be a millionaire by the end of this year. It's like, well, you're $200,000 in debt. So how's that going to happen? So you can envision what you want and move towards it, but to expect something to expect it to be magic, I think is not a great approach.
Yeah, it's so much goodness in there. And one thing that I wrote down was the expectations in terms of envisioning that you mentioned, letting go. And I think there's a conversation there that we could circle back to later. One thing I want to highlight for everyone listening is when those negative thoughts come up, one of the things Adam said is asking yourself, is this useful? That's so crucial. I want you guys to hear that because for those of you that are very familiar with my approach, my work, things like that, I'm all about shadow work. I'm all about, okay, so if I'm feeling this negativity, what is the lesson? What's it here to teach me? Yet there's certain times in our life where we do need to, I'm just going to call it compartmentalize, and show up in the moment. And then my work is more to unpack that later on. Now, one of the questions I get so often is like, what do I do with these negative thoughts if they are coming up and they haven't done like the deeper dive with me, right? And I love Dr. Joe's approach of the change game. Just say change because that fires new neural pathways. What Adam is saying, and I've heard similar things before, of is this useful, is doing a very similar thing. It's not necessarily avoidance because this is where people get tripped up. They think
Right.
that if I'm saying you have to sit with that feeling to just say change or is this useful, it's not avoidance. What's avoidance is constantly circling back to these negative thoughts and just being like, oh, is this useful? Is this useful? Because if you keep doing that over and over again or change, it's just like a band-aid. You're not actually getting to the root and it's whack-a-mole. So it's funny because when we do this work, it's important to have both strategies. There are times when we do need to utilize band-aid fixes or what people would call coping mechanisms or coping strategies to help us in the moment. So I just want to highlight that because I actually really like that a lot. Hey, it's Sam. Can I share something real quick that I think might actually help you? If you've ever felt overwhelmed by your emotions, like you're doing all the right things, yet you still feel off, it's not because you're broken. Most of us were never taught how to feel in a way that actually helps us heal. That's why I created Breath Club, a free community where I guide weekly breathwork sessions to help you regulate your nervous system, process emotions, and return to clarity. We use something called the 90-second reset, a simple, science-backed practice that shows how fast emotions shift when you allow yourself to feel them fully. You'll get access to live calls, a community, and on-demand breathwork exercises to reset anytime. No pressure, just an invitation to feel safe in your body again. Links in the show notes if you want to join us.
I would say, yeah, it's agreed. Like it's certainly not avoidance, right? Because you're not pretending it's not real. It's just, is it useful? Is it helping me right now? No. And absolutely, you need to investigate and understand, and, do some insight practice and some shadow work to figure out like what's causing this and why does it keep coming up again and again? And is there something I can shift in another way? But in the moment, like going over it again and again is certainly not useful. And if it's making you feel worse and worse, it's not gonna get you in a good spot.
Yeah, and just asking the question alone, is this useful, is shadow work. Shadow work, the definition is making the unconscious conscious. It's not positive or negative. It's not happy or sad or good or bad. It's just bringing awareness to what you didn't have before. To just avoid it and act like it's not there, that's avoidance because you're avoiding it.
Yeah.
Okay, so practices. You mentioned a few practices. Maybe we could fire through those real quick and then move on to some other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really what I teach when I work with people in my group coaching program. And it starts with getting clear on what you want, right? And you continue to refine that. But once you're clear on what you want, and this is going to evolve, right? Then you go to the practices. And the first one is talking about your vision. I think that's probably the most powerful thing you can do because it does two things. When you talk about your vision, it forces clarity. It forces you to get what's swirling in your head into words that you can communicate to someone else that they can actually understand. That forces it to become more clear for you. And then the second thing is that it plants seeds for you by doing that, and it plants seeds for them because they are now aware of your vision. And so when they come across something that's aligned with your vision, an opportunity, a job, a new connection, they'll think of you and hopefully reach out to you and make that connection for you. And that has been really powerful for me. I said earlier that I envisioned myself out of a job, or that I envisioned myself in a bad situation. I basically came within 30 days of losing my job at Google because a story I was telling myself about needing to be an entrepreneur and success equal quitting Google. Well, I got what I wanted. They eliminated my job on my team, and I had to find a new job.
Real quick, I agree with that. And what got me into the subconscious beliefs was, one, I manifested my car getting totaled. That's an interesting story. And two, I subconsciously self-sabotaged losing $400,000. So because I didn't feel worthy, and that's a longer story. So all of this is very, very true. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that's the thing also. This is happening whether you're aware of it or not, right? You're telling yourself stories all the time, whether conscious or unconscious. It's happening all the time. And so we can use mindfulness, which is simply a kind, curious awareness, to bring those things into the light and to decide how we want to proceed and how we want to work with them. But so the first thing is talking about your vision. The second thing is continuing to journal, and just journal as much detail as you want, applying it to different aspects of your life. That just reinforces that story, plants those seeds, water those seeds. The third is visualization, right? Seeing it clearly in your mind's eye. You could do that whether you're sitting in meditation or just daydreaming, right? Like it helps. And the fourth thing is really powerful. This is what got me out of that situation. Where I needed to find a job, ended up practicing this mindset affirmations practice. This is essentially, I have this vision. What beliefs or mindsets do I want to embody as I move towards this vision that will help me move towards it? And so, for instance, I needed to find a job. And so the mindset that I wanted to embody was, the world is abundant with opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I saw, and the way that you practice this is say it out loud. The world is abundant with opportunity. Visualize in the past. How is this true? See it in your mind's eye, times when opportunity came your way. Now say it again. The world is abundant with opportunity. How is this true in the present? Is my life abundant right now? Well, I have this wonderful house to live in. I have a healthy, happy family. Those are all great opportunities. Now, again, say it again. The world is abundant with opportunity. How will this be true in the future? And that's where you can start to engage your imagination and see opportunities coming your way. People reaching out with jobs or consulting projects or whatever it might be. And what that does is it gives your brain evidence that this is already true, right? Because in the past and the present, those things are absolutely true. And now you're projecting into the future, giving your brain evidence, planting those seeds, because your brain doesn't know what's true or not, right? Like we tell ourselves anxiety stories about things that never will happen all the time. And so we can choose to plant these seeds intentionally and give our brain this evidence that will then turn on our prediction machine to be ready to spot opportunities out in the world. And the final practice is called mini experiments, which is essentially just finding the lowest risk, easily reversible, low cost way to try something aligned with your vision, right? So if my vision is I want to play pickleball, right? I could go and take a lesson. I could buy a racket and go out with my wife and smack it around on the court, right? It's just like, what you could take a course, you could watch a YouTube video, you can ask AI, right? Like you could have a conversation with somebody who does what you think you might want to do. What is a low risk way that you can move towards this? And so those are the main practices. I'm sure there are more I'll come across and that I've used, but those are kind of the core ones that I teach in my programs and in my workshops, and they've been extremely powerful for me and the people I work with.
Love that, Adam. Thank you for sharing that. And guys, if you didn't take notes, I took notes as he was talking, but feel free to go back and listen again because he literally just gave you a roadmap. So you can take action on that. And just to highlight, like, mindful fire, right? The whole process there is that being energy, and then finally, in terms of the last step of many experiments, that's the fire, that's the taking action. And in NLP, that's neuro linguistic programming, the study of successful people and how the subconscious mind actually works, well, it teaches the model of be, do, have. That's the energies right there. Be, figure it out. That's everything that I talked about. Get clear, your vision, the affirmations, the visualization, the journaling, all of that's the be energy. The do is the mini experiments. As a result of that, then you have what you're looking for. So I love that so much there. One thing I'll ask you about is with the journaling, because there's so many different styles of journaling. One, are you talking about, I think you mentioned daily journaling. Like, how long are the sessions? Are you using prompts, or is it more stream of consciousness style? What does the journaling look like?
Yeah, there are all different types for different purposes. I'd say the first thing is in the getting clear on what you want is there's a core prompt that I use, and it's the one I mentioned before. Essentially thinking, if everything went better than expected, what do I want my life to look like? Look at a 5-year time horizon. And again, people can grab that at mindfulfire.org/soul. And that's just a simple exercise as a starting point. And then, when I say do more journaling as one of the practices, that would be kind of first doing that exercise again, but for specific aspects of your life. And in any of that, I generally do stream of consciousness, and I invite people to write in the present tense, write as if it's already true and you're sitting at your desk 5 years from now describing how incredible your life has gone. That's what I did yesterday for all the different aspects of my life, and it was really powerful. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, I'm also a fan of just like sitting down, the book, The Artist Way, mm-hmm. where it's essentially just write 3 pages every morning, just get it out there, get that pen moving and keep it moving. That is something that I, again, to the theme of not sticking with, I've started a few times and would love to do more of, but just there's something really powerful about getting the swirling thoughts in your head out of your head and onto paper. Because, I always say that trying to work with your thoughts in your head is like trying to grab a cloud. It's not going to happen, right? It's very difficult. So especially when I'm overwhelmed, if I take all of that out and I just write feverishly on a paper and get it all out of my head, I immediately feel lighter, and I have something I can work with in front of me.
I'm very similar to you. I have a lot of resistance to journaling, despite being a writer and author. I think a lot of times in the past when I've journaled, it's more like it sparked something. So then I wanted to create something. So then I'd need to battle, okay, this is about being versus taking action. So just be here now. And it's a process for sure. But journaling, I think anyone that's had any resemblance of a journaling practice, meaning they tried it once fully committed, they'll see it's one of the best ways to get the answers for yourself. Because what we're really doing here is teaching people how to get the answers for themselves rather than outside themselves. And journaling is probably the best way to do it, that I've experienced even more in meditation a lot of times, So it's fascinating. Yeah, cool.
Agreed. And it's funny because I always, I think you picked up on that. I don't know if I said that specifically, that I've struggled with doing that. I certainly with the Artist Way thing, but yes, I know it's super powerful, and sometimes I avoid it, right? And even yesterday when I was doing it, I went through all of the ones. My wife, my sons, my health, and then I was like, but the one I really needed to do was the business, right? As I said, I've been really rethinking where I wanted to put my energy on the business, and but when I got into it, it's like every time I sit down and journal, it's like, this is incredible. I should be doing this all the time, because it is really, really, really helpful.
It's funny how that is, and many of us experience that with journaling. And I've I've worked with a lot of clients and heard from people that are like, "Well, I don't journal, but I do voice memos to myself." And I'm like, "Okay, that's something, but it's not necessarily exactly the same." All right, so we're going to get to where you're moving forward with the business, but before we do, search inside yourself. That's the program that you got started with within Google. It's literally called Search Inside Yourself. That is
Yep.
so amazing. I've never heard of that before. Is that program still going on?
It is. It is going on as far as I know. And it kind of took a hit after COVID because it was an in-person it was initially 2.5 days, 2 full days of content and exercises, and 1 half day that was like a silent meditation retreat within the office.
Wow.
It was incredible. I mean, so awesome, so grateful to have been a part of that. But during COVID, obviously, we couldn't do in person, so it went to a virtual 4-hour format. Um, but one of the things that is really cool that I was able to do, and I just saw this in my journal yesterday, they wanted to cut the funding for it, or they did cut the
Oh
funding
man.
for it, and they needed, because the program was created at Google, and there's an institute called it's called SILI, Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, and they bring this program publicly and to other companies as well. And Google had a relationship with them where they essentially gave that institute the copyright and then paid a licensing fee to use it essentially. And long story short, the funding was cut for the program, and I had an opportunity. I'm close with the people I was involved in trying to save the program, and I was on this call, and they were like, "Yeah, we need like $20,000 for the year," and I'm like, $20,000? That's it? Like
Yeah,
to
for
run this
Google, yeah,
whole
it's nothing.
for
Yeah.
Google makes like $10,000 a second, right? So we could probably come up with this. And so basically, I was like, there's this guy that I know who's a director, and let me reach out to him and see if he's interested in me talking about this and coming up with the money. And he did. He came through, and he provided the funding, and I hope that it's continued, but I feel really proud to be able to say that I've not even to say to know that I had played a part in saving that program, because for a long time, I mean, it's changed countless lives. It's changed my life. And I know, like, there was a wait list of 150, 200 people every single time the course came out. And
Wow.
we were training tens of thousands of people a year. And this was all volunteer. And so I'm very proud of that, because I think it's such an important part of Google's culture. And yeah, it was pretty cool to be able to do that.
That's amazing, Adam. That's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So that was kind of like your training grounds, it sounds like, over the
Absolutely.
last year. Catch us up to speed a little bit about what you were doing and the insights you have in terms of moving forward.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? So I said I was prioritizing money as the primary goal and thing I was optimizing for. And so there were a few things, excuse me, a few choices that I made as a result of that focus, right? And of course, I want to make money, and I want to provide for my family and all of that. But the whole point of what my pursuit of financial independence was to build wealth so that I could pursue my business interests and my entrepreneurial journey on my own on my own time in my own way. And yet I was still prioritizing money. And so what that led me to do is I've had a few ideas. Um, I said I did group coaching, right? I had my first group
Mhm.
coaching session in 2024, and I loved it, right? Like every week I would do this, and things were very challenging at the time, but I'd have this meeting with these four people, and we'd have just, it was inspiring. It was like this conversation every week. And yet when it came time to do the business, I said, I could try to convince one person to pay me X dollars, or I could have a company convince one person at a company to pay me 2x dollars for one day, right? And so I thought, oh, let me go with the easiest path. And I have all these relationships at Google. Let me go and do this at Google. Let me try to build these workshops at Google. And it went okay, right? I got opportunities, but I spent most of my year trying to sell these workshops, right? I was not doing the workshops as much as I would have liked to have been. It turns out the whole business was a sales and marketing thing. And I was like behind the keyboard writing emails, trying to like drum up business. And that just, looking back, like didn't feel that great. It's like, well, what else could I optimize for? If money doesn't need to be the main thing, what about fun? What about connection, right? Because for me, I'm all about creating opportunity through connection. That has been my purpose for pretty my whole life, I would say, but certainly been clear to me for at least 8 to 10 years. And so how about that be the yardstick, right? And enjoyment. What about enjoyment, right? Like, and so looking forward, and then we mentioned before we started recording a book that I mentioned to you when we recorded on my show, what is it called again?
One Last Talk.
One Last Talk by Philip McKernan, I believe his name is, and he spoke at a men's retreat that I was at, and he talks about there's 3 mountains that we climb in our lives. The first one is all about me, making sure that I'm okay, getting my footing in the world. The second one's about us, right? And for me, that's like me and my family, right? That's us. And then there's the third mountain, which is them. And it's essentially like if you had one last talk or one last startup or one last project that you could do in your life, who's the them that you would want to impact and to hear and receive that message? And that kind of always, it's stuck in the back of my head. And as I'm having all these realizations and all of that, I started to think like this mindful fire thing, like I'm really inspired by this. And every time I played a lot of golf this year, being an early retiree. I played a lot of golf, and I was either playing with actual retired people, older men usually, sometimes older women, and I loved playing with them. But whenever I would play, the other group was college kids, young kids that are, have a lot of flexibility.
That's the energy you want to be around. Yeah.
And every time I meet a person who's like 20 or whatever, I cannot help myself but telling them about financial independence. Yeah. Because I know that if they start doing this work, and financial independence is just one piece of it, right? The mindfulness, resilience, envisioning, all of these things come together to build self-awareness, to build a vision for your life, and to start moving you towards that vision. Financial independence just pays for it. Right? But I know that if they are intentional and don't get caught in the traps of lifestyle creep and, lifestyle inflation, right? Whenever you get a raise, a lot of people just increase their lifestyle. They go out, they go on better vacations, or they get a nicer car or a bigger house. If they avoid that, in 10 to 15 years, guaranteed, they can be financially independent and they can live life on their terms. And so I've always had this dream of, this in the someday maybe type of thing where it's like, I want to help people who are, finishing high school, going into college, that age range. I want to help empower a generation of people to live the life that they're meant to live and to live life on their terms using the tools of mindful fire. And so that's the them. And that is really, it's kind of coming into focus. The more I talk about it, right, as talking about your vision is really powerful because it's clarifying. And so this conversation, I was chatting with my mom before this and kind of updating her and on that because she asked about how the business is going. The more I talk about this, the more clear I think I am on this direction, right? Serving people and having more fun and creating more connection, right? And so what does that look like? Another thing that I totally put on the back burner is something that you do. You host a weekly breathwork session, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was doing that during COVID. I was doing a meditation sessions every week, and then I would post them on the podcast. And still to this day, every other week is a recorded podcast, recorded guided meditation. Those are all from that time. But I loved having that community. But because I'm thinking of charging like $10 a month or $100 a year, right? Because I want people to have some skin in the game, but I don't want it to be inaccessible. I would have so much fun just having a space where people can come, meditate, do some journaling, and talk about it, right? Share their wins, share their progress, and all of that. But because I was focused on money as the main objective, I put that on the back burner again and again and again. But that would be fun. And that would make me feel connected, because a lot of this online business stuff, even podcasting, besides this part, it's all put it out there and hope for the best and usually hear crickets. And when you send a bunch of emails trying to get corporate workshops, that's what you get as well, or worse. Nobody can get mad when you put out a podcast, but if you email people when they don't want it, they don't love it sometimes. So anyways, this is all to say that I'm refocusing on what I'm optimizing for, and I'm going to be optimizing for connection and creating space for people to come together through my group coaching program, and also through just having that community, right? That low cost community that people can come to and just be together, And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on what led you to do that, and how that's gone for you.
Yeah, I love it. I fall into the trap of having money as the driver far more often than I'd care to admit, and I had one of my best friends, and also kind of like a mentor. I think we're mentors for each other. We all are in some capacity, for sure, teachers for one another. But she would reflect back to me. This was several years ago, maybe like 2020, 2021, and even still since in recent years, that she's hearing, like, in my goals and in my intentions, money, right? And she's a good voice of being the reminder for me of the impact as opposed to the money. And some things she'll remind me from time to time to play and fun. But what I'm really hearing come through from you is not even like the money or the impact, but focusing on the play and the fun. And I love that so much, because what's the point of doing all this? Like, just to be honest with you and everyone listening, I had a business, but this is before the pandemic, 2019, that was doing $1 million a year while I was working less than 4 hours a day with no employees, just virtual assistants. And my gross profit was around 35-40%. I was doing pretty well there, and I could have kept scaling the business. But then after I did ayahuasca, because I had that numbing depression, I was like, this is not what I want to be doing. So I started this podcast to be like, what's next? And then I slowly experimented with different things, like business coaching and things like that, to ultimately where I am today. And during the lockdowns, when everyone was like pivoting in their business, people in my industry, the promotional products industry, were selling PPE. Now, I didn't align with the agenda of the pandemic. I wasn't vocal about that per se, or like, a no mask type person, just my personal beliefs. But I was like, I'm not going backwards and selling commodities for something I don't believe in. So I looked at it as that's another subconscious thing, manifestation. And I looked at it as an opportunity to kind of step out of that business. And over the next few years, I started to feel the financial pressure because I wasn't making the money I was used to making. So I started to try to rebuild my company, my promotional products company. And I didn't shut the doors on it till maybe a year ago, 2024, 2025. I don't remember exactly, but I was down like 95% from 2020 to 2024, 2025, whenever I shut the doors. But I kept just trying, but I didn't have the burning desire, right? I was doing it for the money driver. And yeah, so for me, it's a lesson that keeps on giving, put it that way.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? Because one, we need money to live, and our entire society is geared around money. It drives everything in the world. And so it's hard to remove that even when it's not necessary, right? Even when I don't need it, you know? And again,
Yeah,
I
we're
like
wired that way.
making money, right? We are. And I like making money and I want to make money, but it's like I don't need that to be the only thing. And I was having it be I was putting things on the side that I know that I like in order to do that. Um,
The
and
last
so,
thing,
yeah,
yeah, the last thing I'll say before we close this out is I actually I don't get a ton of massages, but I will every now and then. I think last year, 2025, I only got like two. When I was in Bali the year before, I was in Bali for about 30 days. I think I had about 30 massages because they're
I
like
bet.
$5. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I think it was 2023, probably like November, something like that, right before I went to Bali. In a massage, I had the idea of the Breath Club. And I end up creating that plan, launching it. And it was initially a solution for businesses for them to buy seats at $50 a month for their employees. And I think like 3 or 6 months went by, something like that, where I had a couple companies that were interested. I thought they were going to commit, then they pulled out. And I was like, you know what? This thing just needs life. So I made it free. And here we are almost 2 years later, and I have about 1,000 members in the Breath Club, and
Wow.
it's completely free. And I mean, you know, it was very aggravating for me to I wanted to launch it. I wanted to do the thing, but I wasn't selling it. So I was like, you know what? This thing just needs life to it. And then I end up creating Breath School, which is $50 a month, and it's 3 breathwork sessions a week, and it actually teaches breath
Mhm.
work. And we recently put that on pause because we're doing some tweaks to it. But I think part of the tweaks to it is the $50 a month became a barrier because we had maybe 5 to 10 people in that community. And then between myself and another practitioner that were leading the sessions, we'd show up and sometimes there would be like no one on the call. Or just for me, like I love speaking on big stages. You know, I love working in groups as opposed to one-on-one. So if there's just
Mhm.
like one person that comes to a call, I don't get really excited, you know, and that all comes back to your point of kind of money being the driver, because since that is a paid for experience, it was actually a little bit different. So interesting, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. In both of these stories that you just shared, that like they're, and my experience as well, is like the universe or whatever. I'm big on The Alchemist, who I share the same last name as with the author Paulo Coelho,
Mm.
and it's the omens, right? There's these omens that we come across along the way that kind of guide our path. It sounds like you were being told in both of those situations something you needed to hear. And for me, this past year, I was trying to do this thing. I was trying to sell into Google, and I just had kept having these experiences where, like, looking back, it's like, look elsewhere, do something. This isn't the path for you, right?
Yeah.
And so, sounds like that was happening for you as well. And and since I've started to orient in this way, kind of coming back to the group coaching and wanting to hold this space and caring about, kind of empowering that generation of people to live a life on their terms. I've had so many omens, right? Like my client, who I haven't heard from in months, reached out today. I had something else yesterday. Like, there's just over and over again. Then I'm having this
Yeah.
discussion with you today, right? Like, there's all these little things that are kind of reinforcing that I'm on the right path. And that's another practice that I forgot to mention, right? Appreciating the progress that you're making towards your vision,
Mm.
no matter how small, accelerates the progress.
I love that. Awesome. Adam, this has been so much fun. Thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast. I'm going to put everything, it's all the links mentioned are in the show notes, guys. So you can just go to the show notes there. Definitely connect with Adam. Check out his podcast, Mindful Fire. And if you've made it this far in the podcast, in just about a week, if you're listening to this live, I'm launching Reset Collective, which is a certification program to get certified in both breathwork and NLP, neuro linguistic programming. So if you're interested in that, click the show notes for more. Adam, any final words before we head out?
No, just thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. And yeah, again, people can go grab that exercise that I mentioned. It sounds like it's going to be in the show notes. It's at mindfulfire.org/soul. And yeah, would love to hear what you thought of the episode, anything that stood out to you. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's just my name. I'll send you the link. You can put in the show notes as well. But love to hear from people, and hopefully by the time you're hearing this, I'll have a little community that you can join and come meditate with me, as well as doing your breath work with Sam. I'll make sure it's not at the same time.
I love it. So good. So good. Thanks again, Adam. And go to the show notes. LinkedIn's already there. And so will everything else. See you guys on the next episode.